Being the second largest English city, Birmingham plays host to several major railway stations. But unlike Birmingham New Street and Moore Street, Snow Hill used to be as exclusive to the Great Western as the LNER was to King's Cross. Starting out as an old gasworks, the station was never meant to be a terminus. Instead, it was meant to be a stop on the proposed Birmingham to Oxford Junction Railway. The broad gauge track ran from Paddington to the heart of Birmingham and was supposed to end at Curzon Street. However, this plan was put to bed by Robert Stephenson himself, citing safety fears that a mutually shared station could bring. So the wooden structure at Snow Hill became the unintended end of the line when the railway was opened in 1852. In 1871, the Great Western, who had taken over the line at this point, realised that a wooden structure was simply not suitable for the increase in traffic the growing city was bringing. Although Birmingham wasn't recognised as a city until 1889, it was well on the path to be. The line had also outgrown its station, and a second mixed gauge line was installed, with broad gauge being removed in the late 1860s. The 1871 station was built on what was the old gasworks, and was built to complement the Great Western Hotel, completed just a few years earlier. Part of the construction including adding a new roof on the cutting, allowing for the Great Western Arcade to be built. The 1871 station design would only last around 30 years or so, in which time travel by train would explode and the twin platform terminus quickly became a bottleneck. To the Great Western, it was obvious another expansion was required, especially now it had to compete with New Street. Although the number of journeys had increased, the hotel's traffic had decreased. People would often complain of rumbling of the freight trains nearby, and the general noise and the trend of staying at hotels near the line was dying. For the Great Western, the hotel's decline was to its great fortune, as the multitude of rooms could easily become the railway station offices. The hotel closed in 1905, and once the office move was complete, work began on the new station. The works engineer at the time, Walter Armstrong, was tasked with the design of this new station, but upon surveying the site, he noted a huge problem. To get what the Great Western wanted would mean a huge expansion laterally, and simply put, there wasn't enough room. They would have to buy out building after building, and the prices would no doubt be inflated, and then get the expense of knocking them down before work could even begin. There was only really one solution to this problem. Instead of building across, the station was built in layers. The basement was used for food and storage. The movement of offices and the storage allowed for the twin platform to be split into bay platforms and two large island platforms. Thanks to a clever track layout, it effectively made a 12-platform station. The offices were made into large impressive booking halls, and all was encased under a large elaborate glass roof. The locals called it the Great Western's Crystal Palace, and it was opened in 1912. It was heralded as the jewel in the Great Western's crown. But within 2 years, the country was at war, and like many other stations, Snow Hill became a hub for military personnel, soldiers and armaments, and were moved almost by the minute. By the end of the World War I, road transport was beginning to take off, including the beginning of motor coach companies. Luckily, the infrastructure was left unshaken by the First World War, but it wasn't as lucky when it came to the Second. The station was hit multiple times by air raids, and although the railways were only briefly disrupted, the station was a bit of a mess, including one brief encounter where a bomb had hit some luggage, causing clothes to fly everywhere, even reaching as high as the roof, causing a pair of ladies' knickers to be stuck up there for months. After the war was over, it was time to say goodbye to the Great Western, and for the first time in its history, another railway company entered the station, that being British Rail. The years after the war brought a brief revival to the railway as customers flocked to the line, desperate for getaways either to the beach or to the country. It seemed that Snow Hill appeared to buck the trend of other railways, as its popularity only seemed to increase, and it was becoming as busy as some of the major stations you would find in London. However, British Rail had plans to electrify the line between Euston all the way up the west coast to Liverpool via Manchester and Birmingham, but Snow Hill only had a limited reach, and the tunnel approach, if blocked, would cause chaos. However, Birmingham New Street had the perfect connections. As more of the west coast became electrified, it essentially cut off Snow Hill, as its steam engines were not permitted to use the electrified routes. In 1967, mainline routes were withdrawn, with preserved steamer Clun-Castle taking the last train. Local routes would soon divert into New Street, leaving the Grand Station a mere shell. In 1969, the old office and hotel building was demolished, and structural engineers deemed the decaying station unsafe. The platform was being used as an impromptu car park, and the site being used as a hangout at night. British Rail decided that the building was simply too unsafe and put in an application to demolish the station. Conservationists and historians were outraged and desperately tried to save it, but the decision was made, and in 1977 the bulldozers moved in. But all was not lost for the station. The West Midland Passenger Transport Executive drew up plans for a new station. It would be nowhere near as grand as what was there before, but the executive had no power to stop the demolition, but he was able to pick up the pieces. The project involved two main phases. The first was to re-establish local routes and use the island platforms to create a four-bay station. The main platform area would incorporate a multi-storey car park, and artificial lighting would light the main platform. It was a no-frills simple structure. However, it would incorporate a few bits of the old building's architecture that was able to be saved. The second phase came about in 1995 when the Kidderminster line was reopened. This was called the Jewellery Line, and with the opening came 3 new stations serving the cities. The station was becoming a hub yet again, so much so that services to and from London resumed, and it's earned its own Metrolink. The work continued to expand and is still continuing, as a further platform on the old disused tram terminus is expected to open later this year. But there are still nods to the old station. Occasionally steam engines frequent there, and there is a part of the old entrance, although this is mostly blocked off. But the most humbling is an old painted tile to commemorate the old station cat. We do not know what the cat's name was or where it came from, but it was uncovered before the demolition and carefully reinstalled, where it is conserved to this day. Snow Hill may not be the station it once was, but like many things, it's slowly rising from the ashes to be an important hub on the network, and for thousands that pass through its doors annually, it is a godsend, making life a little less stressful on that morning commute.